The people of Mortburg are people who love stories. Nestled atop the cliffs that rise above a forgotten coast, the village of Mortburg is one of the tiniest settlements in all the land of Falkland. But its villagers are a hardy people, filled with the hope that comes from the wonders of a well-spun tale. When darkness creeps across their sky in winter, or plague and pestilence gnaw on their flesh in spring, they wrap themselves not in blankets or armor, or even in each other's arms, but within the indefatigable warmth of words. It is these words, these stories, that have given the people of the village their will to persist in an uncaring world, and steeled them against the myriad threats such a world would hurl against them. I shall tell you one such story. As I have said, the people of Mortburg has always known oppression in some form, and whether it be famine or blight, they have always endured. But there is one threat that they could not banish from their minds or their lands. One enemy that they and their children's children faced in a battle of attrition for untold centuries. An enemy strong enough to stand against even their collective hope. For no enemy to mankind is greater than the knowledge of inevitable death itself. And thus, no enemy was greater to the people of this humble village than the being they called the Lich of Mortburgh. In life, they said, he was a powerful sorcerer. Now, seduced by vile magics beyond the scope of mortal minds, he was the deepest darkness of night made manifest. Renowned was this creature of shadow and silence that stalked the lands surrounding the quiet hamlet. His breath, they said, was the force that belched an evil fog that lay upon the village outskirts at night like a black sea of dead souls. Those who entered the fog of the Lich would be subsumed by his vile corpulence. The screams of those sorry souls who had tried to flee the village and brave the Lich's blanket of darkness could still be heard on those long summer nights when the dread Lord would send his minions forth to terrorize the people. Such nights were filled with the wails of the dead who had wandered into the Lich's domain, the shambling corpses of fathers, mothers, children, and animals limped feebly to the wooden walls of the village and beat their decrepit limbs against its surface. This, the people long believed, was their fate, to be nothing more than the playthings of a thirsting demon. As night descended and the Lich's dread host emerged, the children of Mortburg heard their own fathers curse their lives, while their mothers prayed for salvation from the gods that had turned their divine gaze from their dead village. That is, until he came. It was a sun-streaked morning, and yet the people of Mortburg still perceived only the Lich's black mist that shrouded their eyes from the true light of day. But as early morning dew crept in, one guardsman standing at the village gatehouse saw a jet of fire emerge from the shroud of shadow and light up the horizon, breaking the fog apart and bellowing a cry of victory in its wake. Straining his eyes, the guardsman perceived then the impossible. The fiery light emanated from a shape clothed in the purest silver light from within the gale of darkness. The shape of a man. The guardsman immediately ran to inform the townsfolk and the mayor, who decreed that at once the gates would be thrown open, for the village had not seen a visitor in many, many moons. Even then, those the Lich had allowed to pass through his veil emerged with their minds broken beyond repair. And this man, for it was a man, resplendent with a cloak of vermilion and shining silver gauntlets, who wore a long beard and braids that dripped from his chin like a pair of grey snakes coiled in union. This man did battle with the beasts of the fog like they were nothing more than stones to be trod upon. With words of power singing from his lips, he slung spells of light and burning fury at the monsters to singe their flesh and boil their blood. With a staff of carved oak and set with a floating jade stone, he brought down a righteous smiting strike against the undead horde, dashing the corrupted brains of both ghoul and ghast alike. He fought his way through all the Lich's minions, till finally he made it to the safety of the village gate, and only then did his assault relent. For as he held fast against the rejuvenating fog, a torrent of deep dark descended again, buffeted by invisible wings of corruption, and the fog had returned to dominate the land once more. The people of Mortburg helped the beleaguered soul amble into the village and sequestered him in the safety of their meagre tavern. They marked the stranger for his odd robes and bright tattoos that shone under his gleaming eyes. Everything about him exuded radiance. As he walked into the tavern of Mortburg, the people stood to behold him as if he were some deity that had elected to walk among his mortal flock. They spoke in hushed whispers as he laid down his staff and seated himself at a small table to chat with the sweet-stained mayor of Mortburg. Next to this man, a thing of such beauty, the mayor seemed nary a washed-up peasant gathering flies in a dung-heap. But the stranger beckoned him to sit, and then, with the still sober patrons in the tavern hall as his audience, he told them his story. His name was Reinhardt, a wandering mage from a distant realm. Long had he fought the minions of darkness across the land called Folkland, plundering their tombs and stealing their prized treasures. He had fought creatures the likes of which the people of Mortburg dared not even speak of, for to speak their names was to breathe life into such unliving horrors as they. He had braved the deepest, darkest recesses of the abyss that lay in wait for us all, in death. He had walked the path of the undead and the bestial, and lighted it with staff and spell, weaving magic of light with the strength that came with a righteous spirit. His quest, he said, was to rid the world of the great unsolvable problem of evil, one cracked skull at a time. And it was this quest that had brought him to the isolated village that slept in the dark, where peasants carried candles, knowing what evil awaited them if they strayed from the fog that was belched by a creature as old as night itself. He had come to slay the Lich of Mortburgh. The people nary believed his claim, and yet they beheld in his eyes the unquenchable fire of truth that burned without impediment. All his life has been a radiant struggle against the forces of evil. They toiled without rest to bring doom upon the world, and so he said, would never relent in his quest to bring their horrors to heel. He declared to the people, then and there, that they were free from the tyranny of the dark, and strode to the innkeeper to buy a round of ale for all assembled. The mayor, it was said, looked after him as a boy's eyes chased the curtails of a long-estranged father. The villagers offered him gold, hearty pats on the back, and cheers and calls that praised his name. The bards of the tavern took up their instruments and sang the song of Reinhardt the Brave, conqueror of the dead, slayer of lost souls. That day was one full of dance and cheer. It was a day the living of Mortburg sorely needed. Then that night, under the pale blooded eyes of a full moon, Reinhardt went to battle. He summoned the watchman to turn the winch that would open the great oaken gates and allow him to pass into the evil of the fog beyond. He looked upon the looming fog as a great bird of prey, poised to strike, staff raised, whispering incantations that those nearby swore were spells of his very own creation. And the denizens of the dark rose to meet him in the field of battle. Their shambling bones grappled with the staff of Reinhardt, its jade head caving in one chittering skull after another. He fought long into the night, the fog of death slowly creeping in on all sides, obscuring the villager's hero from their sight. Within the miasma of infinite black, he slashed and spun spells that weaved radiant light between the empty sockets of the darklings, and slashed their empty heads against the barren field of Mortburg. Here and there, between flashes of fire and lightning, the people who sat on the battlements of the town's simple walls caught the fleeting movement of their champion and cheered. But the astute amongst them saw the telltale signs of fatigue come over the great mage. For even as he stood amongst them as a godlike slinger of spells, he was still a man. And within the fog, Reinhardt felt his knees buckle as the dead tide kept coming, throwing themselves relentlessly against him, pushing him back to the gates of the village. He began to fight more in defense, edging back through the fog as the light of dawn crept over the horizon. The guards of the gates opened the village to him, and, barely clinging to consciousness, he threw off the reaching hands of the undead horde with a push of ethereal force. Then, barely standing, he threw himself back into the village. Clutching his staff, panting for breath, Reinhardt looked up to gaze on the tired faces of the villagers. He had failed them. He saw it in their eyes and served as a window into the despair of their sickened hearts. He had failed to stem the tide of darkness. He had hacked through more of the undead horde than he ever had in his entire adventuring career, but each talon of the Lich he cut simply returned again, and again, and again. How could one man stand against such indefatigable evil? There were simply too many of them. That night, Reinhardt sequestered himself in his room at the inn of Mortburg. He sunk into his bed feeling useless. What good was all the magic in the world if he could not use it to protect the weak? His time training with the greatest wizards of Falkland meant nothing if evil still reigned over this land come morning. Overcome thus by anguish for the people and his failure, he suddenly became preoccupied with something moving in the corner of his vision. It was a small black shape that moved slowly and deliberately across the silken web next to the flickering candlelight by his desk. He moved with the creature, closer, suddenly transfixed, as he saw the little creature travel in spindle-like legs towards the centre of the web. It was but an ordinary spider collecting its meals for the night. Wrapped in its silken trap, its prey writhed uselessly in their cocoons. The little flies had come to the spider as though following a song unheard by human ears, and it had waited patiently, diligently, for the prey to come. Now it walked amongst them in its own domain, and its feast would begin. Reinhardt's eyes flew open. Yes! He exclaimed within his mind. This was the way. Why wander in the desolate wastes that belonged to the enemy? Why did he flail aimlessly against the denizens of the dark when he could simply let them come to him, here, and strike them down where they held no power? That had been the secret piece of the puzzle he had been missing. Why did the Lich's fog not penetrate the village walls? He knew now it was because it couldn't. The horde could strike fear with their little siege, but they could not take the village itself. That was the weakness he would exploit. He could trap them within the village gates, slaying creatures where the Lich's evil fog could not penetrate. He could do it with ease. He could make the village square into a killing field where his light would burn away the evil roots of the Lich's host till there was nothing left but cinders. Then the Lich himself would be forced to come to him. Reinhardt smiled as he watched the spider sink its teeth into the juicy abdomen of its prey. Like the tiny creature spinning his trap in the darkness, he would let his quarry come to him. That night, Reinhardt told the mayor of his intentions, and, not willing to argue against the word of a potent mage of the realms, the mayor acquiesced to the battle plan. The village square was cleared as the moon once again cast its gaze over Mortburg and its lone defender. The people of the village watched from behind their boarded-up windows and beheld with trepidation the sight of their village gates being opened to allow the black fog that heralded death into their hamlet. And, emerging from the blanket of dark with skeletal fingers grasping for the throats of the living, the vile hordes of the Lich surged towards Reinhardt. His shining staff met their fury, and light battled the darkness of the fading day once more. But this time, the spells of Mortburg's champion did not relent. And as he cracked the skull of a skeletal warrior and crushed the remains under his heel, he saw what he needed to see. The creature did not rise from its ashen grave again. And seeing this, the people of Mortburg erupted into a chorus of ecstasy. Reinhardt fought the creatures of evil like a man possessed. He spun his staff and weaved his spells between strikes that burned the bones of his enemies to ash upon the virgin soil of Mortburg. With each passing moment, he danced between the dead like a spinning marionette, slashing with limb and foot and magic, and one by one the horde fell before him. The black fog had spilled into Mortburg, licking at the corners of houses and tasting the beating hearts that lay beyond those wooden walls and battlements. Now, for the first time in the memory of the beleaguered citizens, the fog rescinded from the open gates. It was the dead of night, and the breath that carried the Lich's corruption was finally being banished from the world of the living. The people rejoiced and ran outside to meet their hero, still bringing his righteous rod of light down upon the eyeless skulls of the damned. Reinhardt heard them run from their houses towards him to watch the raging battle. He welcomed their cheers and performed flurry after flurry of his greatest magic feats for them. He launched missiles of dazzling sapphire and crystalline streams of energy at the crumbling abdomens of his foes, and laughed as their chests exploded in puffs of ashen smoke. Lightning leapt from his fingers towards the creatures draped in shadow that threw themselves at him, claws raised, only to find themselves pumped full of burning, searing light that peeled the shadowy flesh from their meagre bones. Reinhardt twirled in the air and slammed his staff into the earth, conjuring vines that wrapped themselves round the Lich's greatest warriors, constricting them and piercing what remained of their insides with thorns until their heads simply dislodged from their torsos with an audible pop. And all the while the great mage danced like a born raconteur, spinning and twirling, eyes burning with divine light, starting to laugh as his prey funneled themselves into his trap, hacking, slashing, smiting and pummeling his enemies one by one, feeble, ruined, broken like the abominations they are. The people's cheers filled his ears. He was their hero. He was what he always wanted to be. He was, "Dear gods, what have I done?" The flow of battle ceased in an instant, as Reinhardt looked with new eyes upon the village square before him. His eyes beheld not the warriors of darkness, or the skeletal spectre of the Lich itself, for the fog had long ago rescinded from the village gates. But as it fled before the might of the village's great protector, it had left him with a gift that only now had been taken back. Clutching their torn insides, or screaming into the air of night from blood-filled lungs, crushed beneath the staff of Reinhardt, the people of Mortburg lay in pools of blood before their hero. Those that had not already been slain by the mage as they ran out to meet him now looked upon him with greater terror than they had ever gazed upon the minions of the evil one they so feared. Babies and children both wailed over the breaking bodies of their mothers, their skulls eviscerated by searing fire. The guards of the village, who had realized the deception, had tried to stop the warring wizard, and for their troubles they now lay crumbled and torn by the vines and thorns summoned by the master of magic. Everywhere one could see, visions of pain unbearable to the sight of mere mortal minds were stretched upon the ground of the Mortburg village square. The shining staff of Reinhardt fell from his grip. His eyes flew to his face, and he could still see them. He could feel their blood on his wrinkled fingers. Blood that never would be washed clean from his once pure soul. His whole body shook, and he crumpled under the weight of the destruction his own hands had wrought. The hero stood before his beaten, broken charges, and could not comprehend the reality before him. His mind collapsed with the rest of his limbs. He stared into the sky, feeling numb, seeing darkness. Then a voice crept into his skull. "You have failed, mage." It was a voice that scraped the inside of his brain like 1,000 sharp, serrated scalpels. Then it came again. "You came here to defeat the evil that plagued this land. And look now upon the spoils of your labor." And the mage saw himself screaming with glee as he tore the flesh from the torsos of still living men. He watched his own image laugh as he trod on the brains of babies dashed against the ground, their tiny limbs burned to a crisp. And speaking through their bloodied mouths, the voice tinged with the timbre of blackest night scraped the brain of Reinhardt again. "You came here to kill the evil one, mage. Go on. Kill the one responsible for this." Reinhardt's eye was drawn to a glinting dagger that lay at his feet, one dropped by a guardsman that had run at him in a manic rage and tried to stop his massacre. "Do it, mage," the voice echoed in his mind. "Kill the evil one." Reinhardt's hand moved of its own volition as his mind gave way to the sound of truth. The voice was right. He knew it. It was time to end the terror that had befallen these poor people. For those who were still left, watching from their homes in despair and horror, he could put an end to the evil here. He could still be a hero. "Farewell, Reinhardt." The voice spoke with the somber sigh of finality that death brings, the final, deepest sigh we all breathe in the end as we meet our fate. "You shall be a hero in this life and the next." And quivering, With tears streaming from his withered old eyes, Reinhardt plunged the blade into his chest. Since that night, the people of Mortburg have known peace, in a sense. When the Lich came among them and finally proclaimed victory over the
pathetic
little people of that dreary hamlet, he rose them as children among the ranks of the dead. No more did they fear, no more did they cry in the night.
No more did they feel anything at all.
Now they wander the fields of Folkland, men, women, and children all. Where they go, they bring the gift of nothingness with them. They bring the finality of the end, the greatest peace that mortal minds cannot truly conceive but know within their fragile little hearts that they long for, the deepest dark before dawn, made eternal. At the head of the horde their hero walks with them. Resplendent in his robe and dripping grey locks, he truly is the alpha of the pack. Of course, the light that beams from his shimmering staff no longer swells
with the wretched colours of life.
Now it is cold and null, and its touch is like the embrace of darkness itself. This is the end of their story, my listener.
But not the end of mine. My tale will be spread on the lips of those who have risen before me. My name shall be carried in the song that I have taught to the people of Mortburg and their would-be champion. And, like all good stories, this tale contains a vital lesson. Nevermore will the vile forces that call themselves good rise against me. Or if they do, they shall feel the same call that our poor, weak Reinhardt did, and they too shall join my army of the dark. For I am the spider that calls to the flies. I am the Lich of Mortburgh.